The halls of the Minnesota State Capitol are lined with portraits of governors and other notable citizens. Its chambers feature heroic scenes of the Civil War, painted by some of America's greatest artists. There is, however, only a single painting depicting the U.S. Dakota War in the building, hanging in a legislative conference room. Painted by Anton, it depicts the attack on New Ulm in August 1862. His interest in Indians, strengthened by the history of his adopted hometown, led Gog to go to great lengths to create an authentic depiction of the events.
He did a lot of research. The first thing we know about for sure was an 1887 research trip to St. Paul, and he was investigating at the Minnesota Historical Society about the Dakota conflict. And I think he was doing that, he was spurred by a reunion of the 1862 defenders that took place in 1885 in New Ulm. And that was a big thing. All the survivors from New Ulm were there, but they also invited survivors from the St. Peter Company and the Le Sueur Company, people from Mankato, even the defenders of Fort Ridgely. So it was an effort to get all of the settlers and survivors back together, and it lasted for 2 days. And one of the people involved was Julius Burnt, who was, by 1887, Anton Gogg's father-in-law. And he was a very influential citizen in New Ulm. He was an architect. And it would seem that he got Anton Gog interested in doing some large-scale works on the Dakota conflict. So he did research in St. Paul. He also advertised in the paper. There were articles in the New Ulm Review calling on survivors to contact Anton Gog. They said it would be difficult for him to find you, but you can easily find him. So he interviewed those defenders. Interestingly, he also went to the Lower Sioux Reservation to paint portraits of the Indians. And according to one story, he did 2 portraits, one for himself and then one for the sitter, because that was the only kind of payment that they would accept. But it shows his interest in a realistic and authentic view of the Indians. He also collected clothing and various artifacts that he took back and put in his studio. And his children later played with them. They really enjoyed dressing up as Indians. And in fact, so did Anton Gog, because he and friends of his would go camping, and their photographs showing them dressed in Indian clothing and regalia, posing and doing their 3 photographs show a wounded man, a scalping scene, and a battle scene. And they were staged for the purpose of Anton to use for his paintings. And what's very interesting about his work on the Dakota conflict is the fact that not only did he do a great deal of research from the defender's point of view, but he also wanted to capture the Indian point of view as well. Most settlers thought of the Dakota as savages, and we read in the accounts of the battles by Frederick Fritchie and other defenders whose words were collected by L.A. Fritchie, Dr. Fritchie, in 1916, that savage acts were attributed to the Indians, and of course the settlers feared them greatly. So Anton Gog's interest in them and his visits to the reservation, his play acting, his dramatizing for himself Indian battles, and shows that he was interested in seeing them as human beings. And especially in this painting, which is called The Attack on New Ulm, which I believe was finished in 1893, the Indians occupied the foreground. and they are really 1/3 of the picture plane. What really strikes me is that they are not depicted as savages, all smeared with blue earth, the blue-green clay. They're shown as human beings, and they're shown as warriors. In person, this painting is so large that you can actually see what the defenders are doing too, and you can see that they're fighting bravely. You can see one wounded man, someone who's been shot in the temple and who's being borne away. You see a soldier handing out gunpowder. But the Indians are actually shown in larger scale, and I can't help but think that one of Anton Gag's purposes was to show that these were human beings too, that they were being brave, but that they were also vulnerable. So you see men from two different cultures clashing together, as opposed to savages massacring the defenseless white settlers. You're seeing two cultures, and both sides have their nobility, but they're very real. This is not heightened, and I think it's all very naturalistic. The painting is not tremendously smooth. There's a lot of vigor. There are a lot of vigorous brushstrokes, and it has a spontaneous quality about it that fits the event. But he doesn't use a lot of heightened lighting. He has smoke from the fire. He has clouds in the sky. These things add drama, but they're quite naturalistic, because the accounts tell us that the Indians and then the settlers themselves did set buildings on fire. And a storm came up on August 19th, and that's one of the reasons that the battle ended late in the afternoon, because the storm came and there was such a heavy downpour. And so these effects that are very dramatic are in fact true to nature. If this is the same painting shown at the Chicago World's Fair, it was afterwards sold to a man in Mankato, and whose name was Stahl. It hung in the Stahl house for a number of years and then was donated to the Minnesota Historical Society. Now, the Historical Society had quarters in the basement of the Capitol once it was finished after 1905, and so that seems to be why the painting found itself in the state capitol, and it's been moved around the building quite a bit. At present, it's in a committee room, and it can be seen at certain times.